This is Easton with Evan Carlson, the father of American Special Forces and the Marine Raiders. Evans Carlson was born in 1896 in New York. He grew up with a troubled home life and at odds with his parents. Frequently was a runaway from his town, often running away for a few weeks to work odd jobs or go on little adventures, and was in and out of different education until he eventually flunked out, deciding school was not for him. At age 16, after passing an Army recruiting office and seeing a propaganda poster, he decided to join the U.S. Army, lying about his age, which was 21 at the time. Uh, his age was 16. The minimum enlistment was 21. He told his parents before he left off that he was going to see the world and come back in 7 years when he had made a name for himself. And 7 years later, in 1919, when he resigned from the U.S. Army, he definitely had made a name for himself. He retired as a captain, he had been commissioned, and had been stationed in the Philippines, had fought under Blackjack Pershing during the expedition to capture Pancho Villa, and had even been stationed in France at the tail end of World War I. 3 years of civilian life were not kind on Carlson, and he couldn't find a place where he belonged. So he decided to reenlist, this time with the Marine Corps, in April of 1922. And by December of that year, he was second lieutenant due to the credentials he had garnered as a Army officer. In 1927, he went on a tour to China with Major Alexander Vandergrift as an operational training officer. And he became a proficient in the studies of Chinese language and history as an intel officer, as well as Chinese politics. Later that year, he also held his own command position attached to local forces in Nicaragua, where he earned a Navy Cross for a small action to recapture a town from bandits. In 1933, while attached to the USMC's Executive Detachment in Warm Springs at the alternative White House, he became close friends with President Franklin Delano Roosevelt and his son James Roosevelt. Both would prove to be friends and allies to Carlson throughout the rest of his military career, and he would frequently correspond with FDR for the rest of his life. James Roosevelt, a Marine Corps reserve captain, would also end up being in command of the 4th Raiders later on during World War II. Carlson became enthralled with the idea of guerrilla warfare as he'd first observed against bandits in Nicaragua back in the 20s. He served 2 more tours in China during the 1930s, and on his 3rd tour during the Second Sino-Japanese War, he served as a military observer for the United States, ending up embedded with the communist Chinese forces, notably under Mao Zedong, the future dictator of communist China, and was very impressed by their tactics against the Japanese invasion, as well as their unregimented command structure and sense of equality among each other as fighters. By the time World War II began, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was ordered a special force created inspired by the British commandos that were raiding German installations in Europe at the time. Admiral Chester Nimitz also requested a special raiding group to hit lightly armored, lightly defended outposts in the Pacific. James Roosevelt and Carlson proposed the idea, and with the backing of the Roosevelts, the United States Marine Corps greenlit the idea, though they did not like the designation of commando as it was seen as redundant, since the United States Marine Corps was already considered an elite force. So the term Raider was chosen in its place. In February 1942, 2 battalions were activated for the Marine Raiders, with the now Lieutenant Colonel Evans Carlson selected to command the 2nd Marine Raiders Battalion. Carlson's Raiders differed wildly from their 1st Battalion counterparts, who were commanded by another Lieutenant Colonel named Merritt Red Mike Edson, a Marine Corps legend in his own right, who had a more traditional commando-style unit. Carlson's Raiders, on the other hand, were trained as a dedicated guerrilla warfare group with Carlson's instruction. They were a very unorthodox group with their own 10-man squad structure pioneered by Carlson, with a squad leader and 3 fire teams consisting of an automatic rifleman, a submachine gunner, and a rifleman for a base of fire support, as opposed to the traditional 8-man rifle squads used by the Marine Corps at the time. A lot of the men that Carlson handpicked for his unit were former outdoorsmen and sharpshooters in civilian life, and also well-read men, as Carlson himself was well-read with literature, especially as his time studying Chinese history and language. Some of the Marine Raiders were even volunteers who fought against the fascists in the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s. Carlson instilled equality among the ranks he observed when his time in with the communists in China, and some within the Marine Corps started to grow suspicious of Carlson for his unorthodox nature to command, disrespect for authority, and possible ties to socialist movements. Um, in August of 1942, both Raider battalions were deployed to Guadalcanal, and while the 1st Battalion would remain on Guadalcanal and brood in battles there, the 2nd Raider Battalion was recalled for a special mission to raid Macon Atoll in the Gilbert Islands. On August 17th, 121 men from the 2nd Battalion were deployed around the morning hours of August 18th to Macon. The objective was to destroy the garrison and draw away attention from Guadalcanal, as well as gather any intelligence on the Gilbert Islands that they could. The Raiders nearly destroyed the entire garrison over the entire night, with there being a disputed number of Japanese dead, ranging from 50 to 160, depending on sources. The Raiders lost 19, and 9 were captured and eventually executed. Carlson ordered an evacuation. It was a very sticky situation. It was a very stormy night, and it was hard for them to get off the beaches in their collapsible boats. They were unsure of the remaining enemy number, but they managed to get off the island and return to Pearl Harbor. He was awarded a 2nd Navy Cross for his action on Macon. The raid achieved very little in regards to strategic value, but it proved a massive morale boost in the United States. And in fact, Carlson even later oversaw production of a short movie in the United States based off the Raiders' exploits on Macon. The other big action that Carlson and his Raiders, in his time commanding them, are known for were the Long Patrol. Later on Guadalcanal in November, Carlson embarked with 700 men on an expedition through Guadalcanal. A 30-day trek with his 700 men, involving several ambushes on key Japanese encampments and troop movements. They hiked about 150 miles throughout the entire island, encountering several Japanese, and have estimated to have killed over 500 Japanese soldiers at a loss of 16 deaths. They achieved some pretty good strategic gains for the Allied forces in Guadalcanal, silencing artillery that had been firing on Henderson Field and intelligence on Japanese movements throughout the island. But a large number of the raiders, when they returned from the patrol, had come down with either wounds or diseases of some kind, including Carlson himself. Carlson earned a 3rd Navy Cross for the patrol, and the Marine Raiders were withdrawn from Guadalcanal. They would be combat ineffective for months on end, and Carlson would be separated from them due to his recuperation. After Guadalcanal and his recovery, Carlson was eventually relieved of command of the 2nd Raiders when all 4 Raider battalions were combined into one regiment in 1943. Carlson would continue to remain active in Marine Corps affairs during the war, although his role was somewhat limited by those in charge due to them being wary of his communist and socialist ties. Many times he would request to partake in command and planning of Marine Corps operations, and he was denied and instead put in an observer role. In fact, after being an observer during the Battle of Tarawa in 1943, he was actually pretty disliked by a lot of Marine Command because he chewed out a large number of Marine Corps officers for the lack of preparedness for Tarawa, and blaming this lack of preparedness for the high casualty rates sustained on Tarawa. He served as an observer on the Battle of Kwajalein in February 1944 and was wounded as an observer in the summer of 1944 in Saipan. So Carlson, because of his wounds on Saipan, it's worth mentioning that he was wounded trying to rescue a downed radioman, eventually retired from the Marine Corps after World War II in July of 1946, the rank of Brigadier General, and lived out the rest of his life in Oregon. where he passed away in May of 1947 at the age of 51 in Portland due to heart complications. He's buried in Arlington National Cemetery in Washington, D.C. Carlson leaves a legacy as a very confident and strong man who built himself up from nothing. And he also leaves a legacy within the Marine Corps today as his uh, unique pioneered squad composition of 10 men with 3 fire teams was later adopted by the entire Marine Corps and improved upon in the decades following World War II. In recent times, in 2014, the 1st Marine Special Operations Battalion of MARSOC, which stands for Marine Special Operations Command, renamed themselves to the 1st Marine Raider Battalion in honor of their World War II predecessors and Evans Carlson, who they owed their existence to.